Alright everybody, welcome. I thought I would go ahead and do a tutorial for the basics and principles of Dune Imperium. You know, this game, I put a lot of content out for it on my channel. I'm just going to go ahead and go into an AI game, basically. And a lot of people don't really know the game, or, you know, with new players, I think this version of the game in particular poses a lot of difficulty with, because there's an initial curve in learning the center of gravity of how the game works, so that you don't end up kind of flailing. I've talked to a few people who sort of struggle with that, so I have a big, sort of more in-depth, detailed guide on most aspects of the game, but I thought that this one would just be a simple one where I explain how Dune Imperium works. So, to that end, we're going to be talking about Dune Imperium Rise of Ix, just because that's the version that people are uploading on YouTube right now. That's what ranked games are run under. If you watch a Cheesable video, or you watch a Bludgeon video, or you watch one of my videos, it's going to be played with that rule set. So, that's what I'm going to show off here. If it were up to me, I would show off Dune Imperium Rise of Ix plus Immortality, but Immortality is not out yet, so we're not going to do any of those mechanics. So we're just going to load into an AI game. I'm not actually going to play the game. I'm just going to open up to the game board and show you guys kind of how that works. We're not going to discuss deep strategy or anything like that. If you want that, go read my big Dune encyclopedia. But I'm just going to go ahead and pick Una here, and we'll get the game started. So, yeah, let's go ahead and let the AIs do their thing, and here we go. Okay, so the way Dune Imperium works, it's a deck-building worker placement game. So it's a combination of a game like Agricola or Feast for Odin, and a game like Dominion or Slay the Spire. So that's kind of what it is. And if you look at the game board here, you have what's called the Imperium row over here. These are the cards that are currently available that are randomized to be picked up. And you have two cards, really three cards because one of them is fold space, but two cards that are always available, or they have such a high supply that you're usually not going to run out of them for a long time. And then you have these five, which are more random. And every card has two sides to it. It has a top half and a bottom half, and that's really the core gameplay innovation of Dune Imperium. All of these cards have nothing in their top half, which is why they suck, pretty much. Signet rings have a top half, but Una's doesn't. And then the bottom half is what you get when you don't play your cards. So you play two cards usually, maybe three if you have your Sword Master, and then you reveal the remainder of the cards and get whatever is shown on the bottom. This blue number here is Persuasion, and you use it to buy the cards over here. I'm the kind of guy that generally thinks that Persuasion is kind of underrated, and that you want to prioritize it because it's what you use to build your deck, which is a deck building game, so that's how you have fun. Anyway, generally speaking, the way that the game is played, just explain the basic strategy of it, is that there are three phases to a game. The round count is sort of looked at over here. You can see this, we're in round 1 of 10. 10 is the maximum number of rounds a game can go, but generally speaking, the game lasts between 6 and 8 rounds. 6 or 9. Sometimes you have games that go to round 9. My last video, the game went to round 9. But generally speaking, the game will end in round 7. Sometimes it ends in round 8. If it goes earlier or later than that, then it's a little bit unusual. But that's how long the game you can expect to last. Every round has a combat where people compete for a set of rewards, first, second, and third place. And generally speaking, the way that you should play the game, you kind of divide it into three phases: early game, mid game, and late game. So in the early game, on almost every leader, you are drawn to two sections of the game board. I think this is important because if you don't know how to play the early game of Dune Imperium, Rise of Ix, you're really going to struggle. And that's something that really sort of hurts people when they try to get in. So this advice doesn't really apply so much to Uprising if you're playing that version of the game, because it doesn't include a shipping track, but this is what I'm going to talk about. And again, this is the main way the game is played. So anyway, the center of gravity of the game is this faction right here, the Spacing Guild, and these two spaces right here, the shipping track. These are the most important parts of the early game, and they're important all game, but they're especially important early. The reason for this is that the Swordmaster space here gives you, it's basically a 50% increase of the of your action economy, right? These two agents represent an action each. You can take 2 actions. Once you get your Swordmaster, you unlock a 3rd action. So once you start having that going on and you have 4 actions, 3 actions, 4 if you have like a Mentat or something, but once you have 3 actions, you're able to do way more than the other players because taking actions in and of themselves are valuable. For example, if you go to a faction space, you're going to get a faction bump. 2 bumps on a faction gives you a point. So even if the space itself didn't do anything, oftentimes just going to factions is innately valuable. So taking actions is important, and the quickest way to get your Swordmaster is through these spaces. What's more, once you have 2 influence on the Spacing Guild, you've gotten to this point, you gain access to this Interstellar Shipping space. And the Interstellar Shipping space is pretty much the best space in the game. In terms of pure value, no space offers more than Interstellar Shipping does. You can say that Highliner gives the greatest overall benefit, but it has a heavy cost, right? So in general, or like Swordmaster gives a long-term benefit, but you only ever go there once. You can't get your Swordmaster multiple times. So in general, the game is played where one person rushes to get to this Interstellar Shipping space, and another person rushes to get their Swordmaster as quick as possible, and then the other 2 players focus on doing something else. So, to sort of illustrate that point, if only one player has access to this space and they can go there every round, they're going to accrue so much value that they win the game. And the reason that this is important is because if you allow, let's say you're going first, right? You're playing with your friends and they're more experienced Dune Imperium players. If you allow them, you're going first and you just leave this full space open and the second player monopolizes it, what's going to happen is that player might run away with the game because they're the only one that has access to Interstellar Shipping. Now, the value of Interstellar Shipping goes down significantly the more people that can go there. Because the way this track works, the value is higher the more times you can go there. So if me and Armand de Kaz here, Archduke Kaz, are taking turns going to Interstellar Shipping, that's half the value that the space would have if only I was going to Interstellar Shipping. And if there's 3 players going to Interstellar Shipping, then it's a third the value sometimes. So the key thing to mention here is that always early be aware of what's going on with the guild track and make sure that not just one person has it. If it can be you and no one else, that's fantastic. But if one of your opponents has 2 influence with the guild, then you're going to have to try to make up for that in some way. The other center of the gravity in the early game is the smuggling track. The reason for this is because, again, Solari is the most important resource in the early game because it helps you get your Swordmaster online. And the smuggling space provides Solari, and if you go there twice, it will produce 7 Solari. If you go up, you get 1 Solari. You go down, you get 1 Solari, and then you can choose to gain 5 Solari and give every other player 1 Solari. So what that translates to is 5. And if you find 1 Solari from anywhere else in the game, that's 8, and you can get a round 2 Swordmaster. Yeah, so in general, I find that the second player tries to go for either double smuggling, or double fold space. This is important for you to understand. And then the first player tries to find a way to sneak into double smuggling or double fold space. And then the third and fourth players usually try to find their own strategies. Typically, that's something like Wealth Mentat, but it could also be like a Hardy Warriors play or a Conspire play, or there's a lot of other options in those seating positions. But that's how it breaks down. In the early game, you're trying to get good cards, you're trying to get your Swordmaster and your High Council online, you're trying to get high-value technologies, and then you go to the mid-game, and the mid-game is more about, and mid-game I'm going to define as rounds 3 to 5. We'll say 3 to 6. Rounds 3 to 6, maybe run 3 to 5. That's kind of the mid-game. And at that point, you've already got your Swordmaster, hopefully. Maybe you even have your High Council, or you have something like a high-priority technology. And then in the mid-game, your focus is trying to figure out your game plan. How am I going to win this game? You don't really have to know that in the early game. In the early game, get your Swordmaster, get your High Council, get your high-priority technologies, and the chips will fall where they may, and you'll eventually end up in a good spot. But by the mid-game, you need to figure out a plan. You need to figure out, how am I going to win this game? The game is won when one player gets to 10 points. Once one player hits 10 points, the round ends, and then at the end of that round, whoever has the most points wins. So, if you want to win this game, you got to get to 10 points. In this version of the game, you start with 1, and Immortality you start with 0, which makes a lot more sense. And you basically have to find out, in the mid-game, how am I going to get to 10 points? There's 4 points, which people call the easy points. And those are the points you can get from the 2 influence spaces on each of these 4 factions. Getting those is easy and not super competitive. It's hard to prevent somebody from getting there, and everyone will usually get 3 or 4 of these over the course of the game. So those are the easy points. The hard points are points that you have to figure out. So points from combats. Usually late game combats give 2 points. Early game combats give 1 point. Technologies will often give points. You can get points from buying Spice Mist Flows. The important thing to understand about Spice Mist Flows is that they are cards which are bad. It's just a bad card. It has no faction tags. It has no ability when discarded, no ability when trashed. It can't go anywhere. It doesn't have any persuasion. This card is terrible, but it gives you a point when you buy it. And that on its own makes it a really integral part of the game. And so you're trying to figure out, how many Spice Mist Flows do I have to buy in order to win this game? If you get to 4 persuasion on a faction, you get an alliance. And the alliances are also points, but they're competitive, unlike the first 2, where players can go above you and steal the point. So generally speaking, I don't try to rely on alliances as part of my path to victory. On average, you'll probably end each game with 1 alliance. But it depends on the strategy that you take. Not all strategies are as good at playing that path as others. If you buy a bunch of cards like Power Play here, you're going to have to be very competitive on alliances. But instead, if you focus on buying value cards like Gurney Halleck or Thufir Hawat, you might not be as competitive on alliances as the guy who bought Power Play. Okay, so yeah, people take different focuses in the game. Every game, there's going to be combats that provide points, so you can reliably know that there will be combat points out there. You just have to be able to win the combats. But anyway, there's also a lot of intrigue cards that provide points, but that's the mid-game. You're trying to find a path to 10 points. Then, when you get to the late game, generally speaking, the game splits by round 6 or 7 to where now you're trying to actually close things out. And the most common way people do that is by gearing their deck towards being able to buy Spice Mist Flows and focusing on trying to win the combats. Because a 2-point combat victory can really put you over the edge, especially if that's at the expense of another player that might have been getting 2 points. So in the mid and late game, you start to see, round 5, round 6, people buying cards like Herekus Liaison, which on their own are not very good cards, but they have 2 persuasion. And the thing about Spice Must Flow is it's a 9 persuasion card. So it's always there telling you if you get 9 persuasion, you can buy a point. So this card, because it sucks, it's really bad in your deck, you kind of don't want it early. You want to wait, usually till round 5. I tend to wait till round 6 and then start buying these at that point. So that's how that works. And then the most common way to win the round 7 onward combats is by going to the Highliner space. Highliner is very expensive. It costs 6 spice. It's not easy, but it gives you a ton of troops and makes you very likely to win the combat. Now, certain decks, if they're geared the right way, can win without Highliner. They can, if they have cards like Shai Halud or Gurney Halleck, or technologies like Artillery, or certain intrigue cards, they can win. There's lots of routes to winning late game combats, but in general, by round 5 and 6, you start to have to ask yourself, am I going to be able to get to Highliner in those last rounds? If the answer is no, then you focus on other things. But if the answer is yes, you need to make sure that you're going to have 6 spice for it. So that's the overall basics of how Dune Imperium is played. You also have to consider in this game who's ahead of you and who's behind you. That tends to be very important. So, for example, if I'm sitting at 6 Solari, we know the Swordmaster costs 8, and Ilbon in front of me has 10 Solari, right? And it's currently Duke Ikaz's turn. I can go Diplomacy to Wealth and get myself to the 8 Solari that I need to buy my Swordmaster, but we know that Ilbon will get there before me, so it's not going to be worth a whole lot. So another big part of the game is considering what your opponent's capabilities are. That's a little bit more advanced, but turn order does matter a lot, especially when it comes to this shipping track. But the explanation for beginners is basically in the early game, you focus on buying good cards, getting to 2 influence on the guild, getting your Swordmaster. The mid game, you focus on just kind of having fun. At that point, you have fewer demands on you because you already have your Swordmaster, and you don't necessarily have to win all the combats. So just figuring out your path and having fun with your cards is kind of the mid game. Then by the late game, you tilt your focus towards buying Spice Must Flows and towards potentially stealing alliances and winning the final combats. So there you go. That's sort of an introductory guide to playing Dune Imperium and what the strategy looks like. Hope you guys have a great day.